Cool. We good to start then?
Yes, you do. Go, Caitlin.
Awesome. Well, then thanks everybody for joining us for what I hope is going to be a really exciting discussion on automatic textbook billing and how we can, create a truly inclusive way for students to get the materials they need to participate in class. So I'll give everybody that's on our panel today a moment to introduce themselves, but first, Daniel, if you want to go to the next slide, wanted to set you guys up with the Mentimeter that we are going to be using for some quick icebreakers in a few minutes. So I posted the code in the chat, or you can quick scan the QR code. But we can do quick intros now. So Daniel, if you want to go to the next slide too, you can see everybody's Twitter handles and engage in the conversation online. So I'm Caitlin Vites. I am PIRG's Higher Ed Campaign Director based in DC. So I work on a bunch of different campaigns for our national network of students and consumers to push back on powerful special interests like the textbook publishers and make college more affordable. Daniel, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Daniel Williamson. I'm the Managing Director for OpenStax. We make free textbooks and low-cost, affordable online learning technologies. I think Winnie's next.
Yes, my name is Winnie, and I work with Spark as the Open Education Ambassador and got my advocacy in Open Ed started as a student.
Hey, all, my name is Nick Sangstecken. I'm a current Chancellor's Fellow at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm a recent graduate from there as well. I'm class of 2020, or the COVID class. As a student, I was a college affordability campaign. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sweet. Sorry, someone said that in the chat.
It's a little bit quiet actually.
Here, I'll go in my settings after the intro. But as a student, I advocated for affordable textbooks, specifically pushing back against inclusive access, which I'll talk about in a second.
Hi, I'm Megan Dempsey. I am the Instructional Services Librarian at Raritan Valley Community College in New Jersey, and I'm also the chair of our OER Steering Committee.
Howdy, y'all. My name is Ryan Erickson Kulas. I am the Program Officer for Open Educational Resources at the Michelson 20MM Foundation, which is a small family foundation based in Los Angeles, looking to spread access and affordability to higher education.
Cool. So that's our panel, but first we want to learn a little bit more about you guys. So if you want to go to Mentimeter and answer our first question. So that's going to be, is there automatic billing on your campus? Let's see what everybody's familiarity is with this idea of inclusive access and digital delivery of online materials.
And just in case you missed it at the beginning, you can go to menti.com and then enter the code 1549127, and that will allow you to access the interactive polling.
So it looks like we've got about half of our audience responding so far, and a pretty even split between whether we have automatic billing or not.
Should we go to the next slide?
Yeah, sounds good. And then I'm curious, who here has actually had a discussion with some of the decision makers on your campus about automatic billing? Yeah, we're hoping that, in today's agenda, the idea is we're going to do just a quick overview of, the textbooks landscape to set the ground rules, I guess. Talk a little bit about some key things that we see about automatic billing, and then give you guys some tips on how you can start these conversations on your campus and really have a discussion about some of the common trends that we're seeing and how we might respond to them. Cool. So for those 18 folks that are looking to get some help, hopefully you can find some good content today. Cool. So Before we hear from all of our panelists, I wanted to give you guys a quick overview of some of the things that we're seeing right now, and then some of the key findings from the report that PIRG put out this past February on automatic textbook billing. So I imagine that for most of the people on this webinar, you're pretty familiar with that chart on the right-hand side of the price of textbooks rising over the course of the past few decades. I think we've all talked ad nauseum about the skyrocketing cost of textbooks, but I think the thing that's more exciting and interesting here is how prices have kind of plateaued over the course of the past few years. And I think that's due to a couple of key factors. So one is, you can see from this quote here from the Cengage CEO, publishers have realized that price increases were a little out of control. And that fluctuation the past few years, I think, is due to a couple of key factors. The first is that students have a lot more options than they used to. So thinking about not just buying used books, but also lower cost options like rentals or, open educational resources, or getting ebooks that are lower priced, or even access codes. All these concerns about publishers being able to hit the bottom line has pushed them to reframe their strategy from being book creators to software creators, and ultimately to shift the market to a place that uses more access codes and more single-use products to eliminate that key competition from used books. So again, Michael Hansen has stated that the used book market should fall away if publishers are doing their job correctly. So a couple of the key strategies that we're seeing more commonly across the country are increased use of access codes. So again, single-use product that is really just totally different from the textbooks that I used when I was in college and graduated in 2015. But also the restriction of print copies. So again, shrinking the size of the used book market. And then of course, moving over to automatic billing programs. So you might know this by a variety of different names, be it inclusive access or perhaps a trademarked brand name from one of the publishers or bookstores like Barnes & Noble's First Day. But what do we mean by automatic billing? Well, I think the first thing to put out there is that this is not a new or innovative product. It's really just a payment method to push those single-use materials and to digitally deliver stuff to students. So for automatic billing, there's a charge placed by the institution on a student's tuition bill or some other central account with the university. And if that charge is going to be put in place, it has to follow two key rules to make sure that affordability is front of mind for any of those charges. So the first is that these materials have to be offered below market price at a significant discount, and that students must be able to opt out of these charges. A handful of institutions across the country have set up automatic billing to be opt-in, but currently it's an opt-out system. And then before we talk about some of the problems that we might see in the automatic billing marketplace, I do think it's worth acknowledging why some people might be interested in these partnerships with publishers and bookstores. So setting up an automatic billing arrangement is a little bit less effort than setting up that community-driven infrastructure of, a full-throated open textbooks program. And so there's less people that are decision makers on this sort of thing. So typically we're seeing the heads of departments or perhaps a top-tier administrator like the auxiliary services director being the person that's working with the bookstore or the publisher to set up this billing And professors, if they're already using commercial materials like access codes, don't actually need to change the material that they're using oftentimes, and especially considering how access codes plug into a course's LMS. It's a pretty straightforward system for professors, but of course, for students, it might be a little bit more complicated in the early phases of implementation to opt out. And then finally, I think a lot of people are really interested in saving students money and making the process easier. And these claims of affordability that the publishers I'm pushing, I'm glad that we won the affordability argument and that we're all striving to make prices cheaper for students. But there's not a ton of information from other places other than the promotional materials from publishers to sort of price check those claims of affordability. So I think that brings us to our next step in the conversation, but like, what is the counterpoint to the marketing push on automatic billing? So I think if you guys are going to take away 3 key points from this presentation, I want it to be these. So all in all, there are some problems in the baseline contracts and then how these programs are implemented in marketing that could harm faculty and student choice if not done the right way. And while, you know, affordability, first and foremost, we're glad to see those discounts that are part of automatic billing. There's no guarantee that these price cuts are going to stick around. And if, you know, the conversations that are happening about big deals in academic journals and their contracts with rising prices are any indication, we worry that this might continue the trends that we've been seeing for the past few decades of rising textbook costs. And then finally, a lot of these deals, especially in this pandemic environment, are being signed pretty quickly. So my big recommendation to campuses is not to start with, you know, what the baseline program that's being offered to you to bill students, but really, you know, bring a group of people together on campus that are all stakeholders in this decision: faculty, students, staff, libraries, bookstores, admin, and actually start with what you need out of a textbook affordability program to deliver truly inclusive access to students, and then go from there to find whatever affordability program actually meets those needs. So I think those are my big takeaways. But I did want to highlight some of the key stats that I found in our review of automatic textbook billing contracts. So I did a lot of the analysis, but want to also give a shout out to Nick, who did a lot of the open records requests to find these contracts and, you know, sort of got the ball rolling for us, pushing back on a Pearson program at UNC. But to go back to my earlier thought about you know, there being problems in the contracts, in the implementation and the publicity of these programs, wanted to just highlight a few key stats. So across our contracts, it seemed really hard for schools to be able to keep those federally mandated discounts that they had been promised in their contracts. So oftentimes, if there was a quota, it would be somewhere around 85 to 90% of the class needs to stay enrolled in the automatic billing fee for this discount to stay in place. But 2/3 of contracts had negative consequences for the school if that quota was missed. And so that discount would disappear usually the next school year. So we have concerns that if that contract was followed through on, some students might not get the discounts that they were promised. And then in some contracts, there was a potential for uncapped price increases and then limits on the number of print copies that students could purchase. So again, thinking back to the push to eliminate the used book market, restricting the number of book copies that students could get, and then also only selling them loose leaf copies, which are sometimes hard to resell, reduces the numbers of cheap options that students And then two final thoughts on this before Daniel gets to talk. There's some problems in implementation that could harm faculty and student choice. So there's been a number of institutions that I've heard from, and certainly folks on this call might also have their own anecdotes of faculty feeling under threat and feeling like academic freedom is being threatened by the start of these automatic billing contracts on campus. But obviously as a student group, I'm mostly concerned with the lack of transparency that students might have when they get that email detailing the charge and the opt-out process. So those discount structures might not be totally clear to students at the time when they're opting out. So it really reduces their ability to shop around and make sure they're getting the best price. And then finally on, the publicity and marketing, more than 40% of the institutions that we looked at had limitations on the publicity around these partnerships. So while, of course, these sorts of, agreements between the two parties, that clause is pretty common across all legal contracts, we do worry that that could have a chilling effect on institutions' ability to shop around and make sure that, they're getting the best discount possible for their students. So I think I'll leave it at that and let Daniel take the floor.
Excellent. So we are running a little short on time, so I'm gonna zip through some stuff and basically tell you that you should all go to wefreethetextbook.org. It's all over, hopefully, my background, and there'll be on another screen to join others who are interested in getting the word out about the potential challenges that these programs bring to students. But I wanted to share 3 questions that always come up when I'm talking about the perils of inclusive access or automatic billing programs. And those are, if automatic purchasing programs save students money, why is it bad? And I'm not going to answer this question fully because I don't have enough time, but what I will ask you to do is think very critically about this question and think about the questions that we actually underlie all of this. So first is, who's actually saving money here? Is it the student who borrowed the book from the library? Is it the student who rented the book? Is it the student who decided to purchase a used copy of the book? Is it the student who made the financially decision not to buy the resource because they needed to save money to afford their groceries? Or is it just the student who purchased a brand new copy? So that's the first one I want you to really think about. The next part of this is, how do we define what a good discount is? If the discounts are really, really good, why won't the publishers let the students opt in? Students are very, very good about going around, finding the best prices, finding the best choice that matches their budgetary needs. Why don't we, if it's a really good price, if it's a really good budget, why do they have to be forced into that program rather than being given the opportunity to opt in? The next question is around students getting the material on day one or first or before that. This is incredibly important. We've seen it in all the PIRG reports in the past that students having it on day one is fantastic. We like programs that make this possible, but trying to solve the problem by forcing every student to buy the textbook is not the only or the best way to guarantee first day access and could come at too high of a price for some students. So why can't we start with OER first and then layer on other opportunities that maybe could come later into the semester if we're going to go with one of these paid solutions? And those paid solutions often are tied up with courseware, other technologies that might be used in the class. So what should we do about courseware programs? There aren't a lot of freely available courseware programs that are available. Totally right. Unfortunately, I don't think the EdTech space is yet at a point where we found an avenue to make all of these platforms entirely free, but this isn't about just free. This is about choice and giving students agency and allowing them to make informed decisions for their budgets. Just like when they chose to go to a school, they were able to look at and determine what tuition bill made sense. The challenge is that often textbook fees, courseware fees, are something that's layered on at the last moment after they've already made the choice to go to a specific school. The only option they currently have is to opt out. So I'd like you all just to consider some of those questions. And I know that the next presenters will have a lot more to say about this, much better than I can. And please go to wefreethetextbook.org to join this movement and get more resources to support your students in your campus. And I'll hand that over to Winnie, an excellent student advocate, and now someone who's at Spark.
Yeah, hi everyone. So like I said, my name is Winnie. I work at Spark, but my story with open education is kind of separated into two sections. The first being my advocacy as the student body president at the University of Houston. I had three main kind of platform issues that I was working on. An open education program and establishing one was definitely one of them. In that role, I learned a lot of things, and I'm going to share with you the three main things that I took away and brought to Spark from that role. The first is launching a student survey. So we were able to uniquely survey what our campus needs are and what our average campus textbook costs are, which is very important because the national average may be different from what your specific institution is. And then, we found that 78% of the students had never had a conversation with their faculty member or instructor about textbook affordability, despite it being a top issue. So that was huge for me, knowing that that conversation was not being had, which led to later on finding out that faculty members also were not aware of what their textbook price was or what the costs were because students were also not having that conversation. The second thing I learned was about student participation and knowledge of open educational materials. Mostly students didn't know about open ed. We would talk to them about like the potential of free textbooks and like free textbooks, how? Like that's not possible. Like it's so entrenched, the publisher culture is so entrenched in kind of students' day-to-day life that they're not aware that open education is a movement and open education is possible on the campus. And then in general sentiment behind inclusive access related programs. So at the University of Houston, there was already kind of mini trials of inclusive access is what I call them, based on kind of the departments who sign these big contracts with publishers for core classes. And those core classes would have to meet a certain quota of students entering, which led to professors changing their syllabus to require 15 to 24% of the grade to be solely about purchasing the textbook, so linked to homework. So while we say, publishers love to say there's a student choice because you can opt out and opt in, a student realistically is not going to be on the right footing if they start at a 76 in the class. And then last but not least, there was faculty awareness of student needs. So we realized that, faculty did not know that $80 a book was high, right? They thought, oh, well, my book is only $80. And then we kind of asked them to do, all right, well, if your book is $80 and I'm taking 5 classes at $80, then that's $400 I'm spending on textbooks just by doing core freshman classes. So the next part was Spark, where I focused largely on inclusive access textbooks. So if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so Spark work led me to kind of an investigation of inclusive access on this end. We went through a lot of inclusive access contracts and learned about all of these things that I just mentioned, the percentages changing after the contract is signed of what percent the grade is for the textbook, and all sorts of other things that publishers were doing, quotas, et cetera. And then we also did kind of a marketing tactic investigation. So we looked into what each publisher was doing, and Caitlin actually found that they were using PIRG statistics in their sell to these institutions based on how students need affordability, but not the full report of what was actually going on. So there's some really outrageous and interesting things that this textbook movement for inclusive access publisher movement is actually pulling from open education community. And then the last bit was data privacy and about how almost like 40% of the contracts I reviewed didn't even mention student data privacy. We didn't even know what was going on there. And then on top of that, kind of a lack of knowledge of what students are signing into because the institution is signing with the publisher directly. And so are students aware of what their data privacy terms look like?
Okay. Right, so I hope, can you all hear me now? Yes,
Yep.
perfect, great. Sorry about that technology, gotta love it, 2020. So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Nick Sangstack. I'm currently a Chancellor's Fellow at UNC Chapel Hill. As a student, I was the undergraduate chief of staff and college affordability campaign coordinator for NC-PIRG, and that's where I got involved in inclusive access. And what I want to do today is give you kind of an overview of what inclusive access looked like on our campus and how we advocated for a program that served our students in line with our university's mission. What we're really fortunate about is just a little bit of background, we were able to turn essentially a Pearson First Day branded program, as Pearson in conjunction with Barnes & Noble, into what is now digital delivery, as we call it, and essentially no different than how a student would typically buy an access code. And the way we went about doing that was we centered around transparency, accessibility, and affordability. I think that first point of transparency is really important. When we looked at how the publishers have gone about implementing these programs across the country, what we notice is there's not a lot of voices included. And that was consistent at Carolina and NC State, or one of our neighboring institutions in the UNC system, where when we first found out about this, I should note, I only found out about this from a random email I wasn't even supposed to be included on. It was accidentally forwarded to me. And Pearson was having meetings with faculty from specific departments to institute this program without letting admin know, without letting students know, and without letting key decision makers in between that dynamic. So what we did as a student body was we pushed for transparency. We wanted to know exactly what this program was. There was no public facing information, so there was no website, there was no email you could go to. So we demanded that and utilized various processes across our institution, various task force and oversight bodies to make sure that happened. And we're very lucky to have that. And we also utilize media. So there's some great news stories there. UNC, as many of y'all may know, was in a tough time in terms of national media then. We've just been through the Silent Sam scandal. And we want to make sure that this was also something that students were made aware of. And because of that, our bookstore, they were very wary to what we were sharing with the factual information that we were sharing with our student body. So the next point I want to mention, of course, accessibility. One thing we advocated for was the use of an opt-in system. There was a point brought up in the chat. We can stay on that past slide. Well, there was a point brought up in the chat about opt-out programs. There's a reason opt-out programs have so low opt-out rates, and that's because there's often nowhere to go. If you opt out, you can't get a resource anywhere else. So what we want to make sure is that students not only were able to opt in, but students had other options. So we tried our best, and I'll get to this to a point, to make sure that when faculty were utilizing this program, that they realized the impact that would have if they chose resources that had no other options. So no used books, no secondary market. And we also made sure that students had the ability to use whatever purchase options they had. One issue with these inclusive access programs is often when it's automatically billed, it's going straight to student accounts, to financial aid. So we wanted students to be able to pay with any option that they wanted to, whether cash, in store, or with credit cards, in store or online. And that's an easy ask. And I think that's something that's important to ask, so students have that ability, so it doesn't impact their financial aid. And the last point, which I briefly discussed, is I think it's important to note that in designing a program that works best for students, it's important to realize that every type of material is intertwined. Access codes, OER, and traditional textbooks, because they're all substitutes for one another. So when we're talking about access codes, it's important to know, and this is what we would tell faculty, that if you're choosing an access code, you can also choose those other things. So it's important to think about the impact that choice has on your students. And the last point on this that we stress to faculty, and I think it's important to note too, is inclusive access isn't a product, it's a mechanism. So if that's the case, and this is something that Barnes & Noble said to us too, that mechanism can be used with any type of material, and that's the case on our campus too. So you can have inclusive access digital delivery for even a traditional textbook, as strange as it sounds. So with that fact, we convince faculty that, you know what, if you like the idea of your students getting your materials early, which is basically what this program is now on our campus, then how about you try utilizing a free resource? So the students will get an email with their OER before classes, or why don't you use a traditional textbook where students will be able to get that material prior to the first day of classes. So again, if you all have any questions, feel free to shoot them off in the chat and see a few, and we can move on to the next slide. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think Nicholas made some great points about arguments to make towards faculty, and that was where I focused on RVCC's campus when I found out from the provost during an OER meeting that Follett, our bookstore, had been pitching Follett Access to our administration. So they were proposing a per credit fee for access, and students would just pay a flat fee based on the number of credits that they registered for each semester. And they were looking for the administration to commit to 100% of students acquiring their course materials through the bookstore. Fortunately, both she and the college president already had some reservations, but she was looking to me for some really strong arguments about why we wouldn't agree to this. And I'll point out that one of the most persuasive arguments for her was that this could equalize education. So a student in a nursing or engineering program would not pay more for their degree just because the cost of their textbooks. So that was something that I really had to figure out how to respond to. On my campus, faculty have really been the driving force behind OER and textbook affordability. So I knew that was the group that I really needed to get support from. Actually, the first thing I did was call Caitlin because I knew that she would have great information for me. And it just so happened this was during the same week or around the same time that the student PIRG report on automatic billing was coming out. So I had some really strong arguments and data to bring to the full-time faculty. And I presented to them at our Council of Faculty meeting, sharing both the benefits that the bookstore was pitching, so they understood where that was coming from, and then the many drawbacks of what they actually wanted to have in place. One of the main things I did was I did the math for them, and I put up on a big screen in the front of the room so faculty could see exactly what their course would cost under this program. And this was particularly powerful, not only for our faculty who had already adopted OER and other free resources, but also for faculty who had made any kind of effort to make their courses more affordable. The proposal Follett was pitching required that if students opted out, they had to opt out of the entire semester. So if they were enrolled in 5 courses and one was OER, their choice was to either opt out of the entire semester or pay, say, $63 for a 3-credit course that was using free materials. So this was a really powerful argument for the faculty. And our developmental English people especially, but all our developmental faculty recognized that their 6-credit courses, students could be paying 3 times as more for the Follett Access program compared to what they were actually using in their courses. A couple of other things that really stood out to them was that the program made a lot of assumptions about students, namely that they register early, that they check their email, and that they trust the emails that they receive. And basically the whole room started laughing when I said that because they know this is not the truth of many of our students. And so there were definitely concerns about that, as well as the data privacy issues that were mentioned earlier. And the fact that the college was signing essentially on behalf of the student that their data would be protected by these services. And that made a lot of faculty really uncomfortable. Other things that stood out for them were the printing and downloading limits. So our faculty do not feel that students prefer digital, and our surveys have found that they prefer it for the cost when it's free or cheaper, but that they do like having print materials to work with in class. So those really strict limits on being able to have offline access to your course materials or be able to print it was something that the faculty really took away. So ultimately I got a resounding resolution in support of telling the provost and the president that the faculty were opposed to signing this contract. Fortunately, that's a very powerful thing on my campus. So we were able to basically shoot it down. But I know that Cengage Unlimited is being used in certain courses. I think students are being marketed directly to sign up for some of the other inclusive access programs, but it is a little bit more choice and it's not coming from the institution. And so that was a fortunate thing that happened early in the spring semester, but then COVID hit. So we've been lucky that because of the president's strong statement in opposition to Follett Access, it hasn't come up again yet to my knowledge, but a lot of things have happened that have this potential for automatic billing to start creeping back in or to pop up if it hadn't been discussed on your campus before. And particularly the fact that publishers made their sometimes entire e-textbook collections available to students temporarily and for free. I think that, could be a slippery slope and may have masked for certain faculty the strategies that their students were using that were pretty ineffective. But I did see that a lot more faculty became aware of students' textbook practices when the library reserve collection was no longer available, or they couldn't share with another student because they were all under quarantine. We were flooded with students who did not have access to their textbooks, and faculty asking, how can I get access for my students? And because those things have now gone away, it's actually opened the door for us to start having conversations with faculty about alternatives. Many more are using the course management system. We're on Canvas. So we can say, when they say, how do I make my textbook freely available for my students? We basically tell them, you can't, but here are all of these other options that you can incorporate into Canvas pretty easily to have free materials. So we've really opened the door for more conversations about OER beyond our core group of faculty who are already engaging in it. And I will turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Megan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we as a foundation sort of got involved in this issue and sort of the work that we did after the PIRG report was released. I think Caitlin demonstrated that, the cost of materials has sort of plateaued. And I think a large portion of that has been due to the advocacy efforts of OER champions, like many who are in this space today. And so when we as a foundation kind of were analyzing the shift in how publishers were marketing their materials, how they were looking to recoup that revenue, the idea of automatic billing sort of was an interesting one and one that we wanted to bring more light on. So we were really, really proud to be able to support the work of PIRG. And what we did after that report was released in February was we kind of took the ball within California and ran with it to make sure that we were educating various stakeholders throughout the higher education community about the issues in and around automatic billing. I think all of us who are here today are very, very immersed in the weeds of OER, textbooks, et cetera. But that's not the case for all stakeholders who are making choices around what decisions should be made, whether these are equitable decisions for students. And so one of the things that I would encourage you all to do as you're looking at the report and sort of digesting this is thinking about how you're defining the problem to people that you're talking about. I think, PIRG and others did a really great job of reframing this issue, not as inclusive access or equitable access or whatever fancy word that a really smart branding marketing company can come up with, but really phrasing it as automatic billing, because that's what that is. I think also too, one of the things that we found to be valuable is sharing the data specifically. And I know Caitlin mentioned some of this at the start, but half of all contracts, failing to disclose the discount structure from what PIRG reviewed. 42% placing limits on publicizing. If these contracts are so great, why are there limits to publicizing them? Of course, we've already talked about the quotas. A third of those contracts reviewed have annual price increases. So really bringing the data to the forefront and asking stakeholders to engage with it and say, is this really a great deal for students? Is this really a great deal for institutions? I also have on here kind of a few samples of some articles that were published on the report and sort of on the issue at large. And I think anytime that you have other sources that break it down for a more not as informed audience, it's really beneficial to share those resources with various stakeholders. And we can go to the next slide. So what we did in California is we reached out to a bunch of champions within the higher education space and the equity space upon release of this PIRG report. Obviously, US PIRG is one of our biggest partners. I also reached out to Spark to learn a little bit about how they've been thinking about inclusive access / automatic billing. They were extremely helpful in walking us through what potential policy plays may be in effect, and that's kind of their area of expertise. For those of you who haven't seen, there's a whole policy tracker that Spark has, so I would definitely recommend you all checking that out. We also then reached out to other members of the open community, so OE Global, CCC, OER, to engage with them about what a solution may look like to put some curtailments around the practice of automatic billing and make sure that students are protected. Outside of just people who are immersed in the OER space, we really wanted to get a consensus of opinions from stakeholders that are kind of within the higher education space here in California. So that includes the Academic Senate for community colleges, various community colleges and administrators at those community colleges, such as College of the Canyons, outreach to student leaders as well as faculty leaders at those various institutions. So if there are organizations within your state, within your community that are really advocating for faculty, for students, these are the people that you want to talk to. And then we as a foundation also have a network of organizations that we partner with on varying equity initiatives. UAspire, Education Trust West, SoCalCan, just to name a few, based here in California, but throughout the country, there are organizations that, you know, they may not be super knowledgeable about this issue, or they may not be super immersed in the space, but if you educate them and sort of bring this issue to them, they're going to be natural allies in, you know, a fight to put protections for students around the practice of automatic billing. Next slide. So some of the broad issues that we sort of shared with stakeholders, with legislatures, and sort of how we frame the issue is really a consumer protection play. We see automatic billing, and I think the report from PIRG really outlines this as you know, a concerning practice and how it's being executed right now and what is happening to students. We wanted to make sure that we put some curtailments around that. So the idea being that, you know, this is a method that is essentially setting up a cartel. You know, students do not have the ability to resell their automatic billing materials. And in fact, there has been a multiple lawsuits and soon to be a class action lawsuit addressing this particular issue, where essentially the publishers are nulling out the used textbook market and creating a monopoly where these are the only places where these resources can be affected. I think the other issue that we're looking at is transparency and data privacy. You know, what is going to be happening with the students' data when they have to opt in to an automatic billing contract, or if they don't opt out? I really enjoyed Daniel's point earlier about the ability to, you know, instead, if this is such a great opportunity, instead of allowing students to opt out, why shouldn't we have students opt in? So educating stakeholders, educating legislators about that. We also, as one of the things that we wanted to bring up, said, you know, why are we putting curtailments around publicizing these? Why are these records not open to the public? If our institutions are entering into these, like, we as taxpayers, our students should have knowledge about that. Next slide. And then lastly, I think what you want to do when you're sharing these facts with educators, with other stakeholders, with legislators, is talking about you know, why OER is better for student success. And there are, you know, numerous surveys around why that is the case, be it, you know, Achieving the Dream, the Georgia study that's been published, numerous conversations today around that. And then the last point that we really made to stakeholders is states have invested in open educational resources. Here in California alone, in the past 4 years, there's been over $10 million spent on developing OER, zero textbook cost degree programs. These are materials that are ready for faculty to be utilizing. And with such heavy investment in that, why are state institutions that are funded by taxpayers then investing in these contracts when they already have OER content available? So in thinking about any sort of curtailment that can be put in place on these, thinking about you know, making OER the default and having to have an explanation or a rationale as to why these state invested resources aren't being utilized already. So I will pause there and pass it back to Caitlin, I believe.
Yes. So we are almost out of time, but want to ask the audience if they have any questions. So here's all of our names. Go ahead and type any questions that you have for the panel as a whole or for individuals into the chat, and we will work our way through them in the past few minutes, and then whatever extra runoff time we have at the end for our hallway chat. But I think my first question for everybody, as we're thinking about how do we, now that we have a little bit of background and some examples from schools around the country, what are some of your top tips for folks to start these conversations on campus? And who is like the #1 person that you recommend that they reach out to start this conversation about pushing back on access codes and automatic billing?
I guess I can jump in quickly. I'm gonna turn that one person into a group of people. Talk to your students, please, 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 and your faculty. What I think we've found on this issue, especially at Carolina, is first off, faculty in many cases don't know the impacts that course materials have on their students. So we want to make sure that they know what's going on there. And then students often don't feel like their voice is heard. So if we can reach out to those two groups, specifically student leaders, those in student government who have the ability to say things and do things that maybe other people can't, you're able to really make a difference there. In terms of a procedural kind of pressure point to always discuss, in many cases, bookstores are underneath auxiliary services. We mentioned them a few times. They're the great people to discuss, to reach out to, as well as your bookstore. You have to have a line of communication. I think the biggest thing there is just bridging, kind of building communication across those various groups and bringing them together. That's what we did at Carolina. We have a student store advisory committee that works very well, and because we were able to bring all those different voices together, we were able to make a lot of change and make sure that we had a program that worked well for our students.
In terms of faculty, beyond OER faculty or people who are engaged with your textbook affordability already, or if you don't have faculty actively engaging in that, I would recommend any faculty members you know of who have that social justice mindset. And that's true of pitching OER, but particularly in this case, to my point about the courses costing more for students who are in developmental courses, taking more credits for one course. Our program in particular was going to be like disastrous for them. So any of those faculty who are keenly aware of the equity issues and might be able to advocate on behalf of our more vulnerable students for whom this is not viable because it doesn't give them any other option beyond the price tag that the bookstore or whoever is putting on the books for them.
It looks like there are some other questions as well that are centering around the bookstores. So one that I see is there anything we can do when negotiating with the negotiating a contract with the bookstore to help with this? And then another similar one was around kind of the benefit of automatic billing to campus bookstores. And I guess a corollary is OER not to their benefit? So I'm curious, Megan, Ryan, Caitlin, Nicholas, if you have any thoughts on those questions.
Our Follett bookstore definitely saw it as a benefit. It's the reason, and I think they were even pretty upfront with the VP of Finance about their reason for wanting this. And that's why they were hoping for 100% commitment of students acquiring through the bookstore, because that was not happening, nowhere close to that. And this was a way for them to increase their profits. They flat out said, we're not making the money that we should be making on this campus, and this is one way that we can.
I can second that. When you look at Inclusive Access itself, it's forcing students to go to that one place to buy their textbook, regardless of if it's an opt-in or an opt-out. Even if it's an opt-in, students are still being kind of pushed into, in our case, at Barnes & Noble. So it is a moneymaker for bookstores, and they were upfront about that at our university too. There was a point in the chat about, well, what if textbooks aren't my bookstore's primary source of income? Well, like that at UNC, we sell a lot of these things behind me. That's the case at UNC too, but there's still a lot of money in it. And especially as we see more options elsewhere, Amazon being kind of the biggest place that students go, especially the bookstores, Barnes & Noble. They're very upfront about the fact that they want to compete with the secondary market and these other places. So there is a benefit for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of the contracts, the only contract I've seen that limits kind of the upsale or the resale rate would be Pearson, who puts a cap at 15% for the resale rate. So that's kind of what bookstores and campuses have. I haven't seen other, unless it was smaller publishers that do that, but most of them don't have a cap. So knowing what those numbers are is also interesting.
Ethan asked an interesting question, which is, if $80 isn't an equitable cost for textbooks, what is? So my answer to that is, I think it depends on the person. I think we learned a lot in the opening plenary today that equity is not equality. It's not equal for everybody, and it depends. And we say at OpenStax that affordability is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Affordability meets students where they're at. So I don't know if there's a single price that's equitable for all other than free. Wonder if anybody else has thoughts on that.
Yeah, so that $80 amount per textbook, I think the kind of bells rang because that was the argument, right? Well, $80 is pretty good. Like, I've seen these intro bio courses at $400 a textbook or $300 a textbook. It's like, I'm doing $80. I feel good about it. And then when we got all of the faculty members in one room and we just went around the room and just asked what the cost of their textbook was, all of them saying that it was fairly low. When we added those numbers together and said, okay, now I'm a student in this one semester, I'm taking your 5 classes and this is my total amount. Then it was like, oh, that makes sense now, right? So I agree with Daniel. Free is, what's most equitable. I think one of the things that we always ask at Spark is affordable for who, right? Like, who is it that $80 is affordable for? And who are we missing in that price?
And I think too, it's also like, do people have choices of price options? So do they have a free option? Can they choose to buy a print upgrade if they want to have that physical OpenStax book? It looks different for everybody based on their own learning preferences and, how much room they have in their wallet.
I think there were some questions in the chat around sort of, what the role of the bookstore is, et cetera, and how you can incorporate OER. And I think that aspect of having print versions of materials and sort of making that part of your culture and part of the bookstore culture is one where you can continue to engage your bookstore. You can continue to be sending students there to get that printed resource if they did want it, is a valuable one.
Other questions? Let's see.
As good and robust as this discussion is and the topic is, unfortunately, I have to gently break in here and let everyone know the session has actually ended. It's 12:56. The presenter said that they would be willing to stay for another 15 minutes and answer questions for folks if you wish to continue. But everyone else, the session has ended and you probably need to go take a quick bio break so you can move on to the next session, or at least we hope you move on to another session. Thank you so much for your participation today and listening. I hope you found it interesting, that you gained much from it. I know I certainly did. It was great panel discussion. So thank you and continue to enjoy your time at Open Ed 2020.
Thank you. So one thing, as people are filtering out, one thing that I saw in the chat was an invite to have bookstores participate next time. I actually think that would be a great idea. I do not think it's a good idea to villainize bookstores.